Everything which seems bad that happens to us, whether it's catastrophic like an earthquake, a divorce, a disease, right? Everybody thinks if something horrible is happening to me, it's because Allah doesn't like me, which actually doesn't take you towards Allah. Instead, what it does is it makes you paranoid. Knowledge is in its transmission. And this is what adab is. Now, the thing is, I'll tell you something else about adab, which initially didn't make sense to me, but now it makes perfect sense. Language and how to speak and eloquence was considered part of ta'deeb, right? Why? Because language shapes the way you think. If you look at our Islamic education system, which was built on 3 pillars, right? In English, they just have one word for education, right? And disseminating of knowledge. In Arabic, there are 3 words. So the first one was ta'deeb, where the word adab comes from. And the thing is, people think adab is manners and etiquette, and this is, it has to be put to death. Man. So always making noise, always talking, couldn't get the exercise and the activities done. Then one day he calls the head of department of maths, a man called Mr. Rogers. Mr. Rogers comes. He's observing that the class is very well disciplined, right? So Mr. Rogers was trying to catch the class being rowdy and unruly and undisciplined. And he couldn't observe it because he was part of the thing that he was trying to observe.
But going back to the slaves thing, did you see the paper that I sent you on Ibn Khaldun about the servitude thing? You remember that?
I did. Sorry, just because they're related.
Okay, yeah, right? That's fine.
So the relationship here is that, again, the way we can liberate ourselves is by coming together in an organized unit. Now, the Muslims are not doing it. What they're doing instead is they are conforming to the current matrix, right? They're not thinking of breaking out and changing the matrix. They are following the matrix. They are following the rules of the matrix to the letter by thinking, okay, so we have to have our own property companies and slap the word halal somewhere and find ways of Islamizing it. Yeah, this nonsensical halalification of capitalism or whatever it is you want to call it. And that is our scope. Our horizon is literally right up our nose. And it's really sad. I've been speaking to some 20-year-olds on TikTok recently. And, this Palestine issue has obviously got everybody up in a rage again. And you ask these 20-year-olds, okay, what is the solution? Now, I didn't tell them the solution on purpose because I want to hear from them what their scope is. And the problem is we are making our kids, and we have made our kids, incapable of thinking. Full stop. Right?
Why can't they think though? What is it? I mean, they've been to school. They can pass their exams. They can jump on a bus. They're obviously doing some thinking.
What they're doing is, in the English language, and now we have hit a wall with the English language. What they have is they've got a fashion of thinking, and this fashion of thinking in English, we call it reason. Reason is not thinking, because what happens is it's just a world according to yourself, a world according to nafs. The way we're taught to think is we observe, we make theorems, we make hypotheses based on our observations, right? The problem comes when we elevate these theorems and hypotheses to al-haq, the truth, right? This is the truth because it has been scientifically verified. Now, all you've done is you have, first of all, defined parameters that you think are relevant, that you think you can observe, right? Then on top of that, you add your own interpretation of events. And whether you do it logically, whether you do it illogically, it's still the same process. You observe, you create the narrative, you set the parameters that define the narratives, right? It's just nafs, self, right? And that's not the truth, because there are things far beyond our capabilities to imagine. We don't even have vocabulary for what the universe is made up of, because we can only see whatever Allah has permitted us to see, right? So on what basis can we say that we can observe the truth, right? For example, even your mood today, I might think it's because this has happened and this has happened and this has happened. But actually the reality is far greater than what we can encompass with our own imagination. And, physicists, by the way, they've hit a wall in the last century. You may have heard of this effect that, I think it's loosely called the observer effect, that by trying to observe a phenomenon, you change the outcome, right? And even this scientist who's now one of these spiritualist gurus, right, called Greg Braden, even he admitted that it's because the observer is part of the phenomenon that he is trying to observe.
Right, but can you give me an example of that?
The example of that is literally everything that we observe. So, for example, I'll give you a silly example, right? When I was at school, my class had a particularly bad relationship with one of the maths teachers, always rude, always interrupting. So,
the teacher or the class?
The teacher. The teacher. He couldn't discipline the class.
Right, so the class was always interrupting him.
Yes. Always making noise, always talking, couldn't get the exercise and the activities done. Then one day he calls the head of department of maths, a man called Mr. Rogers. Mr. Rogers comes. He's observing that the class is very well disciplined, right? So Mr. Rogers was trying to catch the class being rowdy and unruly and undisciplined. And he couldn't observe it because he was part of the thing that he was trying to observe. And what happened is, of course, that when my teacher was there, the kids thought that, we can take advantage of him and not listen to him. But when they saw, the head of department,
they behaved.
Right? So
he basically brought that thing to the phenomenon. His presence actually affected the outcome of
exactly, right. And exactly the point. So the thing is that...
So you can't observe the reality of the situation because of your own presence sometimes.
Yeah. Because the thing is, whenever we try to observe something, we ourselves are part of the phenomenon.
Are influencing it.
Yeah, and in the same way, when it comes to the particle world, as they call it, right? When it comes to particle physics, in order to see something, we need light. Light is apparently made up of not just waves, but waves can become particles called photons. We don't fully understand what the hell is going on, but those waves or the photon in particle interact with the particles that they're trying to observe, that they've tried to mathematically hypothesize about.
We should just tell the audience, by the way, that you do actually have a background in engineering, which is why you're able to speak so adeptly about, I don't know if adeptly is the right word, but you're able to speak so well about physical and engineering concepts.
That when it comes to particle physics interactions, right, we are seeing that light and electromagnetic waves, full stop, have both a wave function and a particle function. And these are quite contradictory because a wave can fit through small gaps and they can propagate. A particle doesn't, right? And the reason why this is really groundbreaking stuff, which we still haven't realized the effect of all of this, is that when we are trying to observe an event, we need sound to hear, we need light to see, right? But that light is going to interact with the phenomenon you're trying to observe.
So it actually affects the outcome.
Yeah, exactly. So the thing that we are observing is not the thing that we have been trying to observe.
So how do you get around it? Then what's the solution then?
Well, the thing is, we have no solution. If you want to talk about living in this sensory world, we have no solution. The only thing you can do, right, and the only thing we must do is just abandon our narratives and realize that whatever is in front of us, the meaning of the source of the meaning is only Allah.
Okay, but
right?
Can you expand on that? Can you tell me more about that? Because this to the people that are watching and listening, this is going to sound very esoteric.
No, it is going to sound esoteric because unfortunately people.
It sounds like not to offend you, but obviously it sounds like platitudes. It doesn't sound like it does. There's nothing that I can take from what you're saying.
Yeah. So basically, I'll keep it simple. The truth is everything that comes from Allah, what Allah has told us, and what has been conveyed through the Prophet ﷺ, right? Everything beyond that is from your own imagination. It doesn't sound nice, but this is what it is. Allah has told us the truth, and this means that, for example, I have, I'm going to use you as an example because you're sitting in front of me.
Okay.
Right? I can have information about you. That doesn't mean I know you, right? You are not the subject of an algorithm that I have created to understand you with the information that I have about you. I can have every single I can have your DNA mapped out and know what every
medical records,
I
everything.
can have your medical records. I can find out when you were born. And again, it's just information about you, right? And I can even maybe predict your moves. And I can even be correct in my predictions that, you know, you're going to go home and then you're going to have a shower or whatever is the first thing when you get home and all that, right? I can do all that. And the thing is, I can be correct, but it doesn't mean I know you. Because within you, there is a whole reality to be explored. Right, Allah has created the world, the world bil haq with al haq, the absolute truth, and it's interesting because the word for truth, for reality in Arabic is al haqiqa. Right, now what this means is that the reality is more like truthness. Right, the truth is not a product of our deduction, because there is far more that is going on. And if Allah is not at the center of your narrative, then it definitely has no relationship to the truth. Right? Because the truth only comes exclusively from Allah. Now, how does this affect thinking?
Yeah, and how do we know that we have the truth? Because Allah's given us the Quran and the Hadith, but what about everything that's taking place? You know, things that are going on, you know, in the world geopolitically and economically and financially, and what's going on between families.
Okay.
How do you arrive to a central truth in all of that?
Okay, so first of all, the way we Islamically construct a narrative, we start off with the truth, which is La ilaha illallah, right? And then we have similar statements of truth like La ghalib illallah, there's no victory except Allah. La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah, that there's no strength or might except Allah. And around these, we start to construct narratives. And it's around here that we start to see the direction in which the world is moving. So, for example, something which may on the surface, and this is something which needs to be challenged, that everything which seems bad that happens to us, whether it's catastrophic like an earthquake, a divorce, a disease, right? Everybody thinks if something horrible is happening to me, it's because Allah doesn't like me. Right? It's this kind of thing that, this happened because 20 years ago I called my mama this, and now the curse has come back to haunt me. You know, we have this very weird way of thinking of everything as, of a strange way of causality, which actually doesn't take you towards Allah. Instead, what it does is it makes you paranoid about everything in the world is basically out to get you. Now, something I did in 1996, I stepped on a dog's tail, and now as a result, my foot has got arthritis. We have this it's a superstitious way of thinking. And by the way, scientism is a new kind of superstition, right? It's not any better that, it's because of, blaming everything on these invisible particles, that this is exactly why I have got the disease, right? The reality is this: everything and anything that happens to you is as a means to get closer to Allah. That is the starting point of that's one of the starting points of Islamic thinking, of aql.
Right.
Aql inevitably brings you closer to Allah.
Aql is not intellect then?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
Aql is, and I have to introduce some words into the English language because of its deficiency. It's qalbik, right? Qalb is an Arabic word for heart. And the reason I use that word as opposed to cardiological or something is that historically, the qalb has always been understood as an organ with a divine subtlety, what we call in Arabic rabbaniya latifa, this something subtle and divine, which means that we don't actually understand what the heart is. There's some kind of,
beyond it being an organ to pump blood, basically.
Yes, exactly. It does have a cardiological capacity, but there is something far more that only Allah knows, because it's the only thing that can contain Allah, right? So this means that and this doesn't have to make sense to us.
There's that, isn't there the verse as well about that if they'd given the trust of the Quran to the mountains would have collapsed.
Yes,
only the human heart can
towards Surah Al-Hashr, towards the end, there is that beautiful ayah which says that, if we had given it to the mountains, it would have just crumbled in submission.
Yeah, only the heart can take.
And in the beautiful ayah in Surah Al-Hajj, verse, I think it's verse 44. And so basically this ayah says very clearly, it is not the it's not the eyes that are blind, but the hearts that are contained in the chests, right? And so this means that the qalb, right, or the hearts, there's something far beyond it that we don't understand. But what is clear from the Quran and what is clear from our ancestors is that this was the organ of cognition. And all that started to change, first of all, in the Christian world, because if you look at ancient history and you look at a lot of their conception, and Greg Braden is good for this because he's got this historical documentations of this kind of stuff. The ancient Egyptians, the ancient Greeks, they all saw the heart as the organ of cognition. And then what happened is I asked my Catholic contact who lives in the US. You know, he just left the Catholic seminary because he decided priesthood wasn't for him. But he is a devoted Catholic, and he goes to me. I went to him. Could you please tell me where in your history, because it started in Europe, this idea that the brain is the thinking organ. Where did the meaning of the words change? And so, you want
to just clarify that the West thinks that the thing that does the thinking is the brain.
Yes.
But what you're talking about, Islam teaches us that the actual thinking and cognition is done by the heart.
Yes.
Which is this is the key of the matter,
yes,
basically.
Exactly. So basically, in Islam, the only organ of cognition is the qalb, which is it's the heart, but it's not a cardiological function. Right? Want to make that clear.
So as Muslims, we shouldn't be thinking that it's the brain that actually does the thinking. The brain is just a calculator.
The brain is just a calculator, right? The brain calculates, it creates hypotheses, right? It creates images, it creates ideas, it creates concepts. Now, this isn't to say the brain is not useful. I want to make that clear. The brain is a useful tool, right? But one must know how to use it. And in order to know how to use the brain, as well as use the rest of the limbs of your body, you need to have aql. And what aql will do, it will align your brain, your limbs, your tongue in the way of Allah, seeking ihsan. And the reason you know that a thought is qalbik, from aql, one of the signs is it's not as a process of deduction. Right? We think contemplation, what in Arabic they say tafakkur and tadabbur and all these synonyms. We think that it is a mental exercise. It is not. Basically, whatever happens to you, as I mentioned, it is there to bring you closer to Allah. Right? Now, when you meditate on becoming closer to Allah, regardless of what's happening, whether you're being insulted, whether you're driving a car, or drinking a cup of tea, right? Regardless of what's happening, if you see that as a way to become closer to Allah, that is the start to aql. And then the thoughts come, I would say, a bit like lightning strike, as in that you can't really predict patterns. Right? It's
based on what you're saying, the majority of the world has probably done only 5 minutes of thinking in their entire life. Most of us have hardly done any real thinking.
Correct. I mean, if that. Because what I want to make clear is that the thoughts that occur are not as a process of trying to make sense. It's not as a process of, algorithmic thinking, where we're trying to connect the dots. No, connecting the dots is calculative.
Which is what they teach us in school, basically.
Exactly. It's the only, and it's not that it's not useful, but if you look at our Islamic education system, which was built on 3 pillars, right? In English, they just have one word for education, right? And disseminating of knowledge. In Arabic, there are 3 words. So the first one was ta'deeb, where the word adab comes from. And the thing is, people think adab is manners and etiquette, and this is, it has to be put to death now.
Because adab is actually more about protocol, isn't it, really?
It's not even about protocol, no.
Okay.
Right? Adab is a condition of the heart.
Right.
And adab, the essence of adab is I abandon myself and my need. You let go of your need for the care of others to come closer to Allah. Right? So you serve others, right? You don't serve yourself. You serve others for the in the way of Allah. That is adab, right? The protocols and the manners come as a consequence of you letting yourself go for the sake of
But
Allah.
what about people who try and hold somebody else to adab and go, right, well, it's the adab is to serve others, so they force you to serving them.
Well,
Do you get what I'm saying?
Well, yeah, I understand. Well, if they're not serving Allah through people, then they are serving other than Allah, and then it's not adab.
No,
it's
as in,
protocol.
like, let's say there's me and you, and I walk into the house,
Yeah.
right? Or you walk into my house, not into. Let's say there's a third place.
Mm-hmm.
I'm already there. You turn up. It's not my house or whatever. You try to hold me account for my adab. As in, you should be serving me because I've just walked in. Because there's a lot of that takes place, isn't there? Do you get what I'm saying?
I understand what you're saying. Again, it all comes down to if it's in the way of Allah.
Okay.
Right? Because the thing is, I can say, Khurram, the way you treated me was really bad. But I could be disciplining you for your sake so you can become a better Muslim. Right?
Yeah, that's what people say.
No, the thing is, what people say and what they transmit are two different things.
Yeah, I know.
Right?
I know. That's exactly what I'm getting to.
I can say, Khurram, I love you.
Yeah.
Right? And do you feel that I love you? And no, you don't think...
No, but the thing is, the way you looked at me as soon as you got out of the car, I could tell. Like, the way you gave me away.
Exactly.
As soon as you pulled into the car park, that transmits far more than what you say to me.
Okay, now you've gotten to the key word here, transmission,
Yeah.
right? Knowledge is in its transmission. And this is what adab is. Now, the thing is, I'll tell you something else about adab, which initially didn't make sense to me, but now it makes perfect sense. Language, and how to speak, and eloquence was considered part of ta'deeb, right? Why? Because language shapes the way you think, right? For example, the fact that there's no word for aql in the English language, there's no word for qalbic thinking in the English language, there's no proper word for tafakkur and tadabbur other than contemplation, which has been redefined as a mental exercise. Right? The Arabic has that. What does that tell you? That these people, that this is what we call the language of liberated people, right? With the English language, it sounds stupid, but it's very hard to become free when you don't have the vocabulary to describe the thinking of free people. Once again, if you try to think about this as a mental process and try to understand what I'm doing or what I'm saying, then it will actually take you further away from the meaning and into yourself, right? You just accept and submit, because aql, this is the difference between aql and reason, one of the differences. So, aql is the cognitive power of the heart, right? Straightforward, good heart, good aql, bad heart, bad aql, right? And aql is used in the Quran as a verb, which means you can increase its intensities. And so basically the more you want to move closer to Allah through whatever is happening, right? The more aql you will do inevitably, and the more understandings as gifts from Allah that will occur, but they will not occur as a series or a pattern of thoughts, right? When I say patterns, I'm talking about...
Your brain switches off in that process, doesn't it?
Well,
purely led by your heart at that point.
Yeah. Your brain starts to dampen, and as your heart expands, and then, as I said, the thoughts that occur, they occur not as a product of some kind of algorithmic or logical deduction. They will occur lightning strikes, and it will change the way you interact with something, because you will start to see things that are, to your own logic, not immediately obvious, and you will be like, oh, I can't believe I didn't see that. And that's basically how aql functions. And the thing is, it is necessary, because when you pray, right, and when we say we reflect on the Quranic ayat, if you're using your brain, it's not going to be very helpful, right? If you're using your qalb, which is, I'm reading these Quranic ayat to move closer to Allah, right? Then you will start to understand them in a way which is very rich and not straightforward.
This has been happening a lot over the last couple of months. There's been loads of, especially women in the US, previously Christian, Orthodox Christian, Jewish, American women who've become Muslim just in the last few months because they want to know what's going on in Palestine. They've picked up the Quran and they literally just are open to just understanding it. They're not necessarily engaging their brain in the sense that you're saying. Like it's just like, I want to let this move me. And they almost can't even explain why they've become Muslim. It's like, well, I feel this is the truth, and they've become Muslim. Yeah. There's been so many of them.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, when you talk about why people became Muslim, I don't know really anybody who has a logical or rational explanation. They just say that it feels comfortable, it felt right? Of course, one of the problems is that we have misunderstood our own Aqidah. So one of the things you commonly hear certain people say is, oh, what about Tawheed, bro? You got to call people to Tawheed. Now, the thing is, I don't disagree, right? But I ask these people, how can you seriously talk about Tawheed when you live in an order of life which completely is anti-Tawheed? It specifically wages war against Allah and His Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And you can talk about Tawheed. Your Tawheed, and this is the thing, knowledge is action. It is not a list of information that is to be absorbed and memorized and regurgitated. That is not the transmission of Tawheed, right? And we know this because when the Sahaba radiallahu anhum, and this is one of the things that really is one of my pet peeves that people love to ignore, that and the greatest example is after the passing of Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, simply because now you can see how the Sahaba really understood things. They traveled, they actually called people to Islam. It was through trade, it was through conquest, right? But the intention was always political establishment. And it is proven that the political establishment and the matrix that the political establishment creates is the most effective way of doing dawah possible. And what we Muslims have done is we have got this evangelical Christian approach, right? And it's not even a secret.
Dawah bros.
It's not even a secret, because the thing is, I went to one of these training workshops. I won't mention the name of who, but it was a very prominent guy from a very prominent, one of these Dawah bro organizations. No names mentioned. And, one of the first things they said is, look at these Christian evangelicals. They come into Indonesia. They are Christianizing Indonesia, right? And it's just like, what about the fact that Indonesia is following, or whichever country, insert any Muslim country you want, is following exactly the same humanistic ideologies.
Yeah, same template. They have a central bank. Yeah. They have a currency that's fiat currency. They
have national debt.
Yeah.
They have Islam as an idea. And this is the big one. Yeah. Islam is not an idea. Allah is not a concept. Therefore, Islam does not have a theology. It is the most atheological deen in the world, because Allah exists as a reality, as absolute truth, not as my idea, not as your idea, not as anybody's idea, right? Forget your idea and the reality will always be there, right? We're going to come and go. The reality is fixed. It's absolute. It's not subjected to what I think. That's the difference.
Okay. Anybody who's watching this, what should they do? Because you got to give them something concrete to say, well, what is the next step they should be taking?
I mean, the first thing, you have to have the intention, right? And with the intention, which is to move closer to Allah, and you take it seriously, because it's going to take you to things that your nafs is probably going to say, don't do it, man, right? We have to be ready to say to our nafs, because the nafs is like a child, right? It's like a child who just, me, and you just say, okay, be quiet, right? This is for Allah. You got to be there to take risks. You got to be there to not live this algorithmic lifestyle, which is, and the reason why we can't justify an algorithmic lifestyle, I want to make it clear. The matrix that we're living in is absolutely abnormal, right? We don't have normality. So, and especially to the men, we need to stop normalizing and being quote unquote normal.
Being normal in this society is to actually be abnormal, isn't it? Because, I get this a lot. I get a lot of people saying, no, well, you're weird. And I think to myself, yeah, but you have normalized abnormality. Actually, you're the one that's weird because this society is fake.
Yeah, I mean,
This society is unnatural.
For God's sake, stop talking about being a man when you're not talking about how to stop the organized theft and robbery of the people, which is enforced through violence, right? Taxation, inflation, and all the other socio-economic means, right? The fact that multinational corporations, people like Sir Philip Green, can just bankrupt companies, become rich, live on a yacht in Monaco or wherever it is, right? Whilst the people become jobless and become increasingly dependent on mega multinational corporations for their as a means of living. Stop normalizing this crap and do something about it, right? Have the sincere intention, right? Sacrifice yourself. Allah says in the Quran, قُلْ إِنَّ صَلَاتِي وَنُسُكِي وَمَحْيَايَ وَمَمَاتِي لِلَّهِ رَبِّ الْعَالَمِينَ. That indeed my salah and my sacrifice, my living and my dying are for Allah, Lord of the worlds. Men must come together. We must have a desire to change the matrix and understand, first of all, what is the model. The model is the Amal Ahl al-Madina, Medina of the Salaf, of the early generations, as a template of life, of normality, of these are the things that we are responsible for rebuilding, right? And then once you've got that, you have to have the desire. Oh dear God,
That's all right.
that's all right. Sorry, you have to have the desire, right? The desire, right? That's part of the aql. The desire to live Islam. Then you have to have knowledge, information, which becomes knowledge when you want to act upon it, which is what is Amal Ahl al-Madina? What does this mean? Then we have to look at opportunities of how your desire to establish Islam and this model, they come together, and you look at opportunities, you work together in a group. This is not an individual endeavor. If you think you can do this by yourself, that you've already lost. There's a reason why in Al-Fatiha you say Ihdina as-sirat al-mustaqim, guide us to the sirat al-mustaqim, right? To the straight path. It's not guide me. And it doesn't change when you're doing nafils by yourself, right? Again, absolute reality, you're saying guide us. Community emphasis. And what you have to aim for, and what I have to aim for, is community, which is a leader that represents, what Allah has commanded, who has the desire to establish what Allah has commanded, and we do it politically, and of course we mean economic power, military power, legislative, executive power, and all these things, right? This is what we mean by leadership. We don't mean some guy who's simply a butler who has to follow a manifesto that maybe they don't even agree with, but because it's the party line, they have to follow the manifesto, and all they end up doing is administering debts on behalf of the government to the private entities that have enslaved the population, right? And no, it's not somebody else's problem. This is something that has to completely go out the window. We have the biggest issue that... have you heard of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy?
Yeah.
Douglas Adams, he described a phenomenon called somebody else's problem, which is a problem that you specifically can't see because you have defined that problem as belonging to somebody else, so that when you have the problem, you can't even see that problem of yours because you have decided it's somebody else's problem.
Mm-hmm.
Right? This is where the Muslims are at. So this is why you hear in the khutbahs nowadays, the leaders are useless, the Muslim political leaders are useless. You hear this kind of talk, right? But nowhere is there the discussion that actually it's our responsibility, right? We have the means, alhamdulillah, right? Work together. Let's stop being depressed. Let us reject. If you want to cure depression, start by working against the matrix that has caused us depression. The kids today, the reason why they have mental health problems, and it's one of the biggest problems of Gen Z and millennials, increasingly, is because they don't have aql. When you are so preoccupied with Allah to the point that even when somebody insults you, you see that the husna of Allah is in that insult, even if you don't understand it, because you have submitted that the husna of Allah is a universal truth, is an absolute reality, then it's very difficult to make that person depressed. You know?
And depression is the order of the day at the moment.
It is.
Everybody's battling with it. No, it's a silent battle that everybody's dealing with.
Yeah,
men, women, children, elderly, probably even the animals are dealing with it.
Now, the thing is, the imams, unfortunately, are also not equipped in this country to deal with, because they don't know, right?
The imams anywhere in the world are probably not equipped with it.
Yeah.
For it.
No, absolutely. And the reason you know this is because I had a very good conversation with an imam last Friday. In Solihull, because the reason I gave him the time of day is because he spoke about the Palestine issue, and he was right that the leaders have not been useful and all this kind of stuff, but he didn't give a solution. So I sat down with him. I wasn't criticizing him. I just, I wanted to, understand where he's coming from. And what it is because he's had training as a counselor, right? Which is, everything is psychological, which is, it's, you change the narrative based on ideas in your head. Right, in Islam, it's not about positive thinking in the way we hear about positive thinking. It's not about that. It's about everything coming from Allah, right? And therefore, it's inevitably good, even if it looks sordid and horrible, right? Even the situation in this country, right? You might think, oh, this is dark and depressing and uncivilized and all this kind of stuff, but all it is that the world is, even this country, is going to move closer to Allah, right? There are opportunities, and there's always an opportunity to establish Islam somewhere on this earth, right? And the fact that in this Gaza episode has increased the curiosity of people in Islam, as well as, of all bleeding things, a TV show Ertugrul, when it got translated into dubbed into Spanish, right? The Latin Americans, right? They've suddenly had an interest in it because Nicolas Maduro, the president of Venezuela, right? He loved Ertugrul.
Really?
No, haven't you seen it? It's actually on video.
No, I haven't seen it.
Yeah, he specifically mentioned. It's very clear as well, right? And there are also photos of him on social media with the traditional Turkish tribesman hat. And the kaya, I think the emblem.
I feel a bit almost remorseful because I was normally very much in tune with what's going on with Ertugrul. I was a massive champion of it. So
no, the Spanish dub of Ertugrul, especially in Latin America, the actor who plays Abdurrahman Alp, I've forgotten his name.
Right, yeah, he's done a lot of ambassador
work
for... Yeah.
Jalal Al. He actually received a shahada from one of the...
Okay.
I think it was
He's done a lot of ambassador work for Ertugrul. He's done a lot of it.
Which is incredibly overpriced because... Well, you can't really grow much there. And so everything has to be imported via planes. Okay. And obviously that...
I know Russia's working on the northern route with Alaska, aren't they? They've built these new ships, the Icebreakers. And they're trying to create... Russia's trying to create... I don't know if China's working on it with them, but at the top of the earth, there's a route that goes from like Russia across through to Alaska.
Oh yeah, that makes sense because of the polar.
Yeah. And apparently, like, it's a really tough route, and nobody's ever been able to make that work properly. And Russia's now developed these icebreakers that can actually make that route work, which America was trying to get it to work, but Russia's got to it first, I think. So there's this new trade route that's opening up at the top, at the north of this pole thing that you're talking about.
So I wonder, is it just going to be Putin swimming? Is that the icebreaker?
I don't know, but it's going to be very, very interesting. Because there's a lot of new trade routes opening up now that have never really opened up before. No, in that kind of a way.
Yeah, only a Russian could think, okay, this horrendously hostile territory, how can we get into it farther?
Yeah, this really cold place full of ice. The Russians love their ice and snow, don't they? You see the baptisms that they do.
Oh, yeah.
In the, there's loads of women that have died that way, haven't they? They just dive into the thing and they just disappear. They die in front of the kids' eyes, Ooh. It's horrible.
Yeah. I was reading an article by it was an Orthodox Christian website, and they actually believe that reflection and thinking is actually done through the heart, right? Oh, right. And they from the word nous, which is Greek, right? They call it noetic function.
Okay.
The problem is that their description with the words they use is correct. So this is where we say that linguistics is not the solution. That linguistically, everything they wrote was correct. But when you ask them to do it, they don't know what they're talking about because they haven't come closer to Allah. And this is where we say thinking, aql, has to be transmitted. Right? It has to go from person to person. And that was the key of adab. That was the first thing that they teach, ta'deeb, adab thing.
I think thanks for coming in.